class, I just wanted to talk really briefly about the concept of restoration, and in particular river restoration. And I wanted to do this before you go on your field trip where you're going to meet the river restoration guys at Las Colonias Park. So chapter 10 in your textbook, the last part of the chapter has a section on restoration after she talks about river engineering. So what I was thinking I'd do, and I hope this won't be too super horrible boring, but just kind of skim through, not skim like read, but kind of point out some highlights in the chapter. I really think you guys should read the chapter before, or this section of the chapter before you go on that field trip, so you're kind of thinking about restoration so you can have some good questions. So first thing that I think we need to talk about, and those of you who've taken restoration classes before, this will be a review, but is we need to talk about what is restoration. And in your book here, what she proposes is river restoration is the restoration of a river to a former or original condition. One of the big challenges with any kind of restoration is how do you define what original is? And often, you know, we're thinking about, oh, pre-European settlement, you know, pre-massive human impact on rivers, but we often don't have data for what that looks like. We don't know what the original condition on a lot of rivers was. I mean, sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And so defining that the goal of a restoration is the first step in a restoration, and probably the most important step. One of the most important, if not the most important steps. The goal of a restoration can be species specific. It could be, we want to bring the Colorado pike minnow back, and that's it. But in order to do that, we have to maybe restore physical habitat, and we have to remove invasive species. So a particular goal that is species specific can result in a whole cascade of restoration activities that can relate to the entire ecosystem. So there's some criticism of species specific restoration, but species-specific restoration can lead to a lot of other good things too. And often it's that single charismatic species or federally listed endangered species that can cause restoration to happen, allow there to be money to make it happen, and that can be the driver. So defining what is the objective of a restoration, of course, is really important. Then she talks about passive restoration versus active restoration. So, ooh, I can highlight, look at that. Passive, it didn't work. Anyway, add highlight, there we go. Passive versus active restoration. So passive means we try to change things so that the system can restore itself. So you might remove or address or stop some activities that have a negative impact, and then the system resets. So one example that she gives is establishing a buffer strip. And another one, is a big one, not such an easy one, is reestablishing the flow regime, the natural flow regime. So if you do that, then the system can reset and passively restore. Active restoration can be actually physically getting out in a bulldozer, with a bulldozer, and doing some dirt moving, planting, like actually trying to reconstruct the channel and revegetate the riparian ecosystem. So that's another thing to think about on the field trip, is are they doing active or passive restoration, or is it a combination of both? Sometimes that's true. So buffer strips and riparian zone management, fencing off riparian areas, restricting livestock access, all of that can be useful for riparian restoration. Riparian restoration plays a really important role, stabilizing, regulating nutrients, filtering sediments, shading. It's a large source of woody debris in the channel, which is important for channel morphology, nesting sites for birds. It can be the source of the dead leaf matter that is the base of a lot of stream, or most stream ecosystems. All right, next biggie. Whew. Restoring the flow regime. And this is a tricky one. So pulse releases are one option. But when you listen to watch the videos by Jack Schmidt, you'll see that these pulse releases are not always the solution. Depends again on your restoration goal. It might be if you plan them at the right time for the life cycle of a fish, but depending on how the rest of the year's flow regime is, what it's like, it can be worse for redistributing sand. Dam removal is a way to restore the natural flow regime, and that is being done more and more in the United States, and has been very successful in a few river basins. One great example is the Conduit River, which is tributary to the Columbia in the state of Washington, where they removed the dam quite dramatically. We should watch the video of that, or Google Conduit Dam removal. It's pretty exciting. But they have been very successful in restoring salmon to the upper reaches. So they've restored the natural flow regime and allowed fish passage. Morphological restoration, so this is actually building structures, which can be very successful. It can also be really expensive, and it can get washed out with high flows and can cause other problems. So that you have to be really careful about that. But this will be a good one to think about when you're out in the field trip next Thursday. As well as in-stream structures. So structures are one of the things that Rosgen restorations also suggest, as well as morphological restoration. And again, if not done well, thoughtfully, by someone who has a lot of experience, they can have some problems. So a little bit about the experimental flooding in the Grand Canyon. You'll want to read that, and associated with the videos you'll watch from Jack Schmidt. Weirs or low dams. So these can help restore gradient to a reach, which can be really useful. They can also provide structure in the channel for habitat as well. Flow defectors can help control bank erosion and work for bank protection. We'll visit some of these on our field trip later this semester. All right, modifying channel dimensions. You can end up with incised channels where you actually have to come in and mechanically use a bulldozer and excavate and change that. Meander restoration. European rivers, there are a lot of places where they're doing this and trying to reconnect river into meanders throughout the floodplain where that hadn't happened before. Another great example of this is the Kissimmee River in Florida, where the Kissimmee River used to flood really dramatically, and we went in and straightened it and immediately realized that was a bad idea. So we spent millions of dollars to straighten it, and now we're spending millions of dollars to make it meander again. It's been very successful. They have not restored it to its natural state. They restored a part of it, and we'll look at that later as well. Recreating pools and riffles, that can be really challenging. That's work, though. One good example of that is the Blue River in Breckenridge, Colorado. That river underwent dredge boat mining for silver and gold. I think there was gold mining in Breckenridge. And what they did is they have these boats that actually literally turn the bed of the channel upside down. So for restoration, they went in and actually literally rebuilt pools, riffles, steps, pools to recreate habitat. There are also some really interesting efforts to try to get large woody debris back in rivers. In the Pacific Northwest, it's estimated that we've removed a lot of it and that it was really helpful and really important for the channels. One example is on the San Rafael River, where they removed tamarisk and they actually let the flood put the woody debris back in the river, and that's been really successful for fish habitat. So lots of options for restoration. Again, the key is to make sure you understand what the objective is, and then good decisions can be made based on that. So thinking about all of those options when you're out visiting the Las Colonias restoration site on the Colorado River. Have fun out there.